Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Welcome back, Elite Achievers, to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You are in the right place if you want to master influence and figure out what is working in leadership today. Lately, I've invited a number of guests with diverse backgrounds that teach the universal traits of leadership. It's my hope that you come for the stories, but leave with the lessons. I love sitting down with the entrepreneurs, the authors, the coaches who inspire us with their journey. And today is no different. Buckle your seatbelts, my friends. You are about to meet Cort Dial. When Intel, Chevron, Disney, and Apple want to cultivate a new breed of leader, they turn to Cort Dial. By guiding individuals through frank self-evaluation, personal change, and the pursuit of extraordinary performance, Cort creates all-in leaders, high achievers who recognize the power of human connections. He is the author of 2016's #1 business book, according to Globe and Mail, Heroes and Heretics. Cort, Heroes and Heretics is a memoir on modern leadership, and you are on the Modern Leadership Podcast. Welcome, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jake. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fantastic, and it is great to have you on the show because I picked up a copy of your book, and I've read through this book, and it really resonates. I love the storytelling that you have and some of these ideas on leadership, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. But before we get into the book, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Did we miss anything in the intro?
No, I live in Austin, Texas with my wife. We've been married almost 40 years. We have a daughter, Katie, a son, Charlie, and 2 grandchildren, Max and Jake, and our life pretty much revolves around them.
Well, that's excellent. Are they down in the Austin area nearby so you can visit?
Yeah, we're all in Austin. We actually own, in addition to my business, we own a baseball player development business as a family. And then my son is a professional golfer trying to make it to the big time.
Oh, now you didn't put either of those topics in your bio, and now you've piqued my interest. So how did you get into this baseball player development business? Now, I assume, do you start with the younger kids that are looking to, excel in their high school and then get into college? Is that where it starts?
Anywhere from little kids, probably about 10, to even some professionals come to us for hitting instruction and things. We started because, and it's actually a chapter in my book, my son-in-law and daughter came to me and wanted my coaching. And there's an exercise I do with folks called A Day in Your Life of Bliss. And in that chapter, I write about all taking them both through that exercise, and out of that exercise, they decided to form this business.
Now, I would imagine that in forming a new business, some of the challenges that you had is just getting the word out, right? And once you get the momentum, then things build on that. What are some of the activities that you guys did to get people aware that this is what you're doing, to go out and find clientele?
Well, before we started the business, we went and sat at baseball games all over Austin at different levels, talked to parents, talked to coaches, found out what they all wanted, and we put together what we call our practice. And then we went around and built relationships with all the leagues and the league owners or league runners, and it's all relationship based. And my son-in-law is just an individual people just adore and love, and so they all want to be around him. So we did open houses and things, but it's basically Trent, my son-in-law, that is who attracts business. People, the parents and the kids want to be around him and be around his coaches who've all been trained in the same methodology I actually use in my practice, my coaching practice.
And I want to point out that the key thing that you talked about there to me was this relationship business. And once you get out there and create an atmosphere, create this relationship with your clients, your customers, your potential clients and customers where they know, like, and trust you, well, then business comes and it runs on that. You talked about your son-in-law as someone that people just adore, that people are driven to him and to talk and work with him. And I think that's important for all of us as leaders, that we cultivate what I term the catalytic leader, which is someone that people want to be around, that they want to learn from, that they believe in their expertise. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, and his level of commitment to the players and to doing things the right way. Their mantra for the business is baseball is for a season, characters for life. And so that's really what his practice is about. And it's growing good citizens, young men and women into good citizens.
Wow, that's incredible. I love that. And then you said your son is on the golf circuit. He's trying to make it as a pro. I imagine that's a lot of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday golfing going on in his life.
He isn't at that level yet. So he plays in tournaments around Texas, Oklahoma, and things, amateur tournaments. And he's going to decide. He was a baseball player, and after sophomore year in college, he switched to golf. So he's got some catching up to do. So we expect him to be where you're talking about in about 2 or 3 more years.
Well, that's incredible. And you know about that study where the guy spent 10,000 hours working on his golf game and knocked off a few strokes. I got to tell you, Cort, I am the golfer who gets his money's worth if you pay by the stroke. So I hit that little thing around so much that I got to go from this side of the course to that side to this side. I get a lot of exercise, so I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, that's where most of us are at. I was fortunate. I grew up on a golf course and took lessons for 8 years. So.
Oh, well, that's fun. All right. Well, after that little detour of finding out about you and your life and some of your passions, I want to jump in and talk about this book a little bit. I want to talk about leadership. And one of the things I want to jump into is this title, Heroes and Heretics. And what does heretic mean, and how did it end up in the title of this book?
Well, if you look through history, the greatest leaders have almost all begun as heretics. People who thought, they were crazy. They had this outrageous idea. They were always rocking the boat. And so that's why I came up with that title. I actually played that role when I was a young person. I actually made a presentation that I write about in my book in front of about 600 of the top executives in my company. It was a huge chemical company. And I was in my mid-20s. And when I was done I made 3 assertions. When I was done, there was silence for quite a while. And then someone in the back stood up and yelled out, "He's a witch, burn him." And the whole room laughed and clapped. And that gentleman who invited me there walked up and he said, "Cort, I have to admit, I don't agree with a single thing you've said here today. Would you be willing to join my team?" And he was the one who taught me that he wanted people like me who saw things differently. And the way I describe a heretic is a time traveler. They're able to go to the future and spend some time there and come back and tell us what it's going to be like. It's going to be better. Jobs did this, King did this, Kennedy did this. All the great leaders have been able to do this.
Well, and as you look at that, heretics are time travelers, and you gave some great examples. What is it that they did as far as, when you think of Jobs, a lot of us think of a marketing genius, somebody who really understood how to present ideas. But what you're saying is more than just presenting ideas. What you're saying is somebody that can look into the future and see ideas and know what to base, their product creation, their marketing on. So how do they do that? How do heretics look into the future?
Well, they can go there and see it, but they can also come back and articulate it in a way where people say, I want to be part of that future. Matter of fact, I want to be so much a part of that, I'm willing to change. I'm willing to do things different, think different, willing to give more of my effort than I would normally give just to keep my job, just to get a decent rating. And Jobs didn't come back and say, hey, here's all the products we needed to make. He came back and described us a future, and he held up that first phone and said, someday everyone in the world will have one of these. And when he said that, most people thought this guy's nuts.
Yeah, and at the time that he said that, he didn't actually have the phone, right? I mean, this is the idea that he had. If you've read his biography, he talks about how they were scrambling from that point to get, they had the idea, they had the concept, they had the technology was there, but they hadn't quite put all the pieces together. And he kind of made a promise that they now had to deliver on. And so is this what you call, Cort, a new breed of leader? When we talk about Intel, Chevron, Disney, Apple, all these companies, when they're looking for someone that can help cultivate a new breed of leader, is that the heretical or the heretic leader?
That's a part of it. What I call an all-in leader is a leader who can capture the hearts and minds of people and get that group of people to willingly focus their maximum effort, their maximum intention on either a cause or a movement or a business imperative, something like that. It's an entire set of characteristics and realizations and skills that all of these people who are able to do this have. And because they're able to do that, they're able to produce performance that's, history making. It's unprecedented.
So as we look at all-in leaders and you talk about capturing the hearts and minds of people, is this something that everybody can do? Is this something that can be taught, or do you have to have certain characteristics leading into it?
No, everyone can do it. There's a definite process that you have to follow, and you have to do the certain things at the right time in the right sequence. But I've taught the most recent client I had, he was in charge of deep water drilling in the Gulf of Mexico for an oil company. And in the first year, he saved over $800 million because he stood up in front of his people and described the future and what it's going to be like to be a driller in the future. And they all signed up for this big game he was playing. And then his first mission he gave them on the way to his vision was, we're gonna deliver every well we drill on budget, on time, the first attempt, which in the history of the industry had never been done. No one's ever been able to come close to that. Well, they did it for 18 months.
So what happens, Cort, if we make these promises or we think we can deliver? What happens to this individual that you just described if they can't deliver on that? What happens when we make promises that are beyond our ability to deliver? And I see the value of being a risk taker. I see the value of looking at projects a little outside the box and being able to overpromise and really deliver on those promises. But what happens when we make promises that we can't deliver on?
Well, I've never had the experience where they've failed. I've had the experience where maybe they didn't quite get there. But as you know, my mom used to say, aim for the moon. If you miss, you end up amongst the stars. I mean, no one has to apologize for producing results that aren't history making, especially when they produce results that are well beyond the goals and expectations of the organization. It isn't about taking a risk. There's when I sit down with a client, I tell them there's no risk in this. This is a never fail process. It's been proven over, thousands of years. Human beings have done this forever. What happened is most of us are convinced through our education system, our parents, and all of that, that there's limits to what human beings can do, limits to what human beings are capable of, and that just isn't the case. Human beings are capable of anything they can imagine, and that is a key skill of an all-in leader. They're able to imagine a future.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely believe in that. I'm a huge subscriber to the power of positive mental thinking and keeping your goals and dreams. You put the limit on what you're able to do. If you take off that limit, there's no telling how high you can reach, how far you can succeed. So let's talk about some of these steps, how we go from being an ordinary leader, a typical leader, maybe a leader with a title or a position, to going to be one of these all-in leaders. What are some of the steps that you walk through?
Well, leaders are not created by going to leadership courses, in my mind. I believe companies waste a lot of time and money on those. Leaders are created when a circumstance and an individual come together, and that circumstance calls from that person parts of their potential they often don't even know exist, but it causes them and forces them to grow and develop as a leader. Now, what an all-in leader does is they intentionally create that circumstance. They make the big declaration that, for example, I was coaching a project manager, major capital project in Saudi Arabia. And I wrote about this in the book. And the project manager made the declaration, we're not only going to build this thing over the next 3 years, we're not going to harm a single individual doing it. But he wasn't taking a risk by doing it. He was making a declaration. This isn't like a promise or a declaration is a very different animal than what we typically think of when we think about taking a risk. He was making a declaration. He was putting it out there, and now everyone that he enrolled had to deal with it. And ultimately, that project worked 8 million man hours, and not a single individual had to leave the site for any medical attention. And that literally was a miracle. It was impossible to do. But it all started with him making that declaration to everyone that was involved.
And that is absolutely incredible. I can't imagine all these workers working in, typically dangerous areas, typically dangerous careers, and being able to do that without injury. But let me ask you this, what steps or systems did he implement to make this happen? So you start with this declaration, which I understand, and we have this power and this commitment the determination that we're going to do, but how do we implement that into the steps and systems that we, going across all these different men and individuals working on this project, how do we communicate that, or how do we make that work? How does it happen?
Well, it's done through conversation, and it's done through conversations that enroll people, and they become what I call a follower. So, for example, in the book, I write quite a lot about myself and helping the management enroll the supervisors on this project, and the possibility that all this work could be done without harming anyone. And in the beginning, they continually said, "No way, it just can't happen. People are going to die. People are going to get hurt." They were all Muslim, and they all would say, Inshallah, which they told me meant it's all in God's hands. We don't determine who lives or dies, who gets hurt. But over time, through conversation, ultimately, they chose to commit to this. And the most telling moment was when I asked them if they had any children, any sons. And I say sons because at that time, no women worked in Saudi. And ultimately, I asked them this question: what's the difference between your son, the sons you tell me would never get hurt? Of course, they told me, oh, no, my son wouldn't get hurt.
Sure.
What's the difference between your sons and all the sons we're gonna bring over here that you're saying have to die? And ultimately, they brought an audit team over to figure out halfway through this how we were pulling off this miracle. And they audited all the systems and programs, came back and said, we can't figure out how you're doing this. And one of those supervisors stood up and said, sir, you're looking in the wrong place. None of that's different. We have the same programs and same equipment and all that you find on any project. What you're looking in the wrong place. And the audit team leader said, well, where should I be looking? And this man stood up and he said, you should be looking at me. And the audit team said, well, what's different about you? And he said, I'm a great constructor. I'm one heck of a supervisor, but on this project, I'm much more than those. On this project, I'm a father. And the audit team leader sat there stunned with this funny look on his face. His face is twitching. He's trying to figure out what this guy said. Then you saw the light go on, and he ultimately said, I'm starting to figure out how you're pulling off this miracle. So it was more than, we're not going to let these men get hurt, because these are our children. These are our sons. These are sacred beings. They're not tools to get work done. They're sacred beings, and we have a sacred responsibility to take care of them.
And so this comes full circle back to how we started, as you talked about jobs and some of these other examples of all-in leaders that we've had throughout time. And what they are able to do, they see the future, and they're able to communicate that vision to their people so that the people also believe in that vision. And that's what you're saying here with this scenario. You have your supervisor that says, hey, this is the declaration that I'm going to make. And then it trickled down from there on, where everybody felt a part of that. And I'm reminded of the story of President Kennedy when he talked about sending people to the moon. And you hear the story about someone in there sweeping the floors, and you ask them, what are they doing? And they say, I'm putting a man on the moon. Everybody saw the vision together and their role in that vision. Now, one of the things that you do is you take people through what you call a frank self-evaluation. And I want to talk to you just a little bit about this frank self-evaluation and the importance of it, and kind of how you do this, especially when you're talking with leaders, industry executives, and so on and so forth, to get them to talk in a frank manner, but also to dive deep inside and do this self-evaluation.
Well, I write a lot about that in the book. There's several stories about that. But the bottom line is I tell my clients, I'll probably be the only person in your life that tells you the truth from my perspective. And that's what you're signing up for if you're hiring a coach like myself. And then I ask them very provocative questions. And my job is to help them see the gaps between the leader they are and the leader they need to become in order to accomplish whatever it is they're up to. And so I start off with questions like, who are you? What do you stand for in this world? What is it you're committed to? Help me understand what it is. I'll start with a client. They really wouldn't even know what they want. They just know they're dissatisfied and they're not getting the results they want. And ultimately, my job is to go out and get them feedback, get them information. I like to tell them that I capture the conversation that goes on when you're not around. It's one you'll never hear through any feedback system in the company or anything like that. And you're going to get some really raw feedback, how you show up, how you're leading. And we're going to look at that compared to what what I'm going to teach you is required to lead in this manner. And you will identify the gaps and you'll decide which of those gaps you want to close in service of whatever our goal or objective is here.
And so part of the success of this process has to be an internal desire on the part of the executive to make that change, to make that improvement. They need to recognize improvement can happen.
Yeah, a long time ago, I worked up the courage to tell the client something I'd wanted to tell him or her for a long time. And that is stop bringing me in to try to go fix your people, because the only person who needs a change around here, the only leader who needs a change is you. And I found that if the leader, the most senior leader, changes him or herself and develops himself into the type of leader we're describing here, the rest of it just happens if you follow a certain process. But it does require, you can't do what I'm talking about with what I call an all-in leader. Any other form of leader can't lead this type of what I call a performance transformation.
And I absolutely agree. It starts with the top and needs to trickle down from there. You can't start at the bottom and create this groundswell. You got to start with the leader and work on that leader. So let's shift gears for just a second here. I want to talk about trends, and you see trends happening in business. And I wanted to ask you what you see happening in business, some of the trends that are starting to emerge now.
The big one I've been noticing is fear is what's driving almost everything in business today. And I'm not sure if it's because of the folks entering the workforce or because times are tough and jobs are tough. But I work with some very big corporations, and I continually hear, well, I can't say that because I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. Or I had a young man come into my office in an organization that was pretty much on its way to being closed down by the company. And he was a young engineer, and he said, Cort, I can save us. I know exactly what we need to do, and I have a way of doing what we do, which will make us profitable again and all this. And he was terrified to share that information. And his boss had actually told him to shut up and don't bring it up again. But I worked with him and helped him understand what a leader is and asked him, are you willing to go all in on this? And then if you are, I'm willing to coach you. Now, ultimately, he is leading the number one project in that organization and doing things he probably wouldn't have done 15 years from now. But he was more than capable of doing it. So that's my biggest concern about business today is fear just seems to be driving everything.
And how do we as leaders get over that? I mean, you talked about this one individual. How as leaders do we get over this fear? Because there really are some things out there that we need to be cautious about. We're not talking about being flippant and not working hard, but how do we overcome the fears that are ingrained in our business society?
Well, I think it starts with the leader not being fearful. Most leaders and most organizations are basically trying to do whatever keeps the boss happy and afraid to do anything other than that. And so it starts with the leaders taking a good look at ourselves and saying, am I willing to do what's right? Am I willing to ask the question needs to be asked, to say what's dying to be said, crying to be said? If I'm not, then why the heck am I here? I had a senior executive was called to the board of directors and was basically called on the carpet, and they were going to try to figure out whether they're going to continue to give him capital. His organization had a number of screw-ups. And I sat with all his leadership team as he presented the presentation he was going to make to the board. And they all turned to him and said, "Oh, it's wonderful. It's great." And he asked me, and I said, "Are you going to take your resignation letter when you go?"
Yeah.
And he said, "What?" And I said, "Who the hell would give you any capital when all you're going to do is walk in there and give excuses for why you've screwed up and tell them how difficult it is what you to do? I wouldn't give you a penny." And ultimately, that totally changed how he went into that room, and I coached him. And ultimately, they did give him the capital. But no one else who really are there to serve him, his leadership team, none of them were really willing to tell him. Many of them afterwards said to me, "I'm so glad you said that to him."
Yeah, and I think that's really important in business, that we not surround ourselves with just yes men and people that tell us that everything's great, but those who can actually see and tell us when things need to be improved. Because even if we're on the right track, even if we're heading in the right direction, there are improvements to be made.
Yeah, and probably a better way to answer the question is be fearless yourself and reward people that are fearless, reward people that ask those questions. Sit in the room and say, okay, what's the question that's dying to be asked that everyone's afraid to ask? Would somebody please ask it? And then when they do, after the meeting, pull them aside and say, thank you so much for being such a fearless person. I need that type of person in my organization.
So we talk about fear being one of the trends that you're seeing in business. A related question then would be, what is the most common mistake that business leaders are making today?
I think the biggest mistake is they're all obsessed with growing. And I've been part of a number of startups, even consultancies and other things, which all regretted, for the most part, growing and growing too fast. Either we outgrew our capability to deliver what made us great and lost all our clients and nearly lost the practice, the business, or we grew this thing into a monster and all of a sudden we sat around the room saying, we formed this company for ourselves to serve us, but now we're all servants to this monster. And it's a basic archetype in systems thinking is the limits to growth archetype. And it essentially says human systems, if their growth is not limited, will reach a tipping point where ultimately, once they're past that tipping point, the system no longer serves the people. The people now are servants to the system. The other thing that happens when a system crosses the tipping point, it becomes a living organism. And like every living organism, its number one priority is to sustain itself and grow. The other thing that tells you we crossed the tipping point is if you try to tear apart that system or dissolve it, it will get violent. It will fight back. I mean, you see it constantly. Each side demonizes the other side.
That is a great answer. The biggest mistake business leaders are making, they're focused too much on growth and not the right kind of growth. And you're not saying that growing is bad. It's trying to grow too quickly or growing beyond what you set up your business to do in the first place. And so I really appreciate that, Cort. Before I let you go, there's a section that I love on the podcast where we ask the leaders 5 to 6 rapid fire questions to kind of get to know you a little bit better, to put a little personal with this business conversation that we've had. And I want to jump into that now. So if you're ready, let's go.
I'm ready.
How about the current book on your Kindle or bedside table?
100 Tricks to Appear Smart in Meetings by Sarah Cooper.
Interesting. And do you recommend it? Is it a good book?
Yes, and I recommend you follow Sarah Cooper. She's hilarious.
Wonderful. How about best movie ever made?
Harvey. It's an old James Stewart movie.
How about your leadership superpower?
Enrollment.
Enrollment. And what does enrollment entail?
Enrollment's the ability to create a space, a psychological space, where a human being can make an authentic choice.
Very good superpower. Thank you. How about your motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra?
The only leader who needs to change is you.
And we've talked a lot about that today during the episode. The leadership change starts with you. It starts at the top and moves down from there. If you could leave just one leadership trait to the next generation, to your children, what would it be?
It's a quote my father gave me. The only free person is one who can say no thank you to an invitation and not give a reason why.
Something we all aspire to, right? That is the pinnacle of success as defined by the father of Cort Dial. I love it. And finally, the best business book ever written.
Best business book, I would say, is Leadership by Peter Kostenbaum.
Now, I haven't read that, so give us just a flavor. What do we learn in this book?
It's about the whole psychology of leadership, and he was the first person back in the early 90s who started writing about leadership as if it's an inner game.
And I'm in full agreement that leadership is truly an inner game. And so it is now on the bookshelf, something that we are interested as modern leaders to read. Cort, I really appreciate you taking the time with us out of your beautiful sunny day in Austin, Texas, to talk modern leadership with us. Before we let you go, can you tell us why we should snag a copy of Heroes and Heretics? What makes it different from just another business book? And then how can we get in touch with you?
Well, you mentioned it was named the number one book a year, and I love the critic when he wrote his review. He said, "I've never had a business book touch me the way this one does." So it's a very inspirational book. It's a novel more than a business book, and I highly recommend the audio book version. I hired an actor out of New York, Michael Bowers, and he did a wonderful job. The best way to just find out more about me is to visit cortdial.com/modern leadership. I've made a landing page on my website for your listeners.
Perfect. Well, we're going to link that up on the show notes to this episode. Can't thank you enough for your time with us today. Cort, if there's ever anything we can do for you, please let us know, and have a terrific day.
You too, Jake. I enjoyed it.
All right, welcome back, Elite Achievers. Hope that you enjoyed that interview. Sure had a good time sitting down with Cort, and thank him again for his time spent with us today. Just a few key takeaways that I wanted to point out before we wrap up this episode. We talked about a heretic being a time traveler, and I really love that concept. He gave us some examples of individuals in history who have been heretics, who have been time travelers, who have gone and seen the future and then come back and inspire us with what can be, what can happen. And I just love that idea. The other thing we talked about is that circumstances and individuals come together to create opportunity. And as we look at evolving as leaders, as becoming the best leaders that we can possibly become, look for opportunities, look for circumstances within your business, within your career, within your life that are forcing you to stand up, to do more, and to push just a little bit harder to get where you need to go. That is part of the modern leadership. That is part of the new breed of modern leaders we discussed with Cort. And finally, avoid that fear. Fear is driving everything in business right now. And it's important that we recognize the role that fear is playing. Is it stopping us from accomplishing the things that we should be accomplishing? One of the things that I loved about sitting down with Cort is he and I are very similar in that it's a mental game. It's all about getting that little area between those two ears of yours in the right place. If you want to be a leader and have people follow you, you need to have that passion. You need to have that positive thinking. You need to believe it's possible, and then go out there and share that vision. Help other people recognize what they can do working with you, through you, following you. Of course, you can get everything that we talked about on the show notes, the book recommendation, how to snag Cort's book, and of course, that generous offer from Cort for special Modern Leadership listeners. All of that will be linked up on the show notes for this episode, jakeacarlson.com/ML37, because this is episode 37, and that just makes sense. You know what else makes sense? Signing up for the free webinar on the CIA of Influence. Learn about building conviction, becoming irresistible, and staying accountable. All the details, and to save your free seat, head over jakeacarlson.com/webinar. And until next week, I want to wish you a great day. Make an even better life. Don't let fear stop you from success, and stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.